What is an egalitarian? An egalitarian is a person who holds two important values and who thinks society should be shaped by those two values. The first value is equality. Equality in the sense of no rich and no poor, not in the sense of making everyone identical or the same, and not in the sense that everyone gets paid the same amount of money, but in the sense of the principle that the economy should be based on, which is from each according to reasonable ability, to each according to need or reasonable desire. So people contribute according to reasonable ability. That means if they're just a child or above retirement age or physically or mentally incapable of contributing, then their reasonable contribution is zero. But if they're in good health and not otherwise prevented, their reasonable contribution to the economy would be considered reasonable if their fellow, let me put it this way, if the egalitarians in the local community making decisions in the local assembly of egalitarians thinks it's reasonable. It's as simple as that. So let me go back now. The sense of this idea of equality in the sense of no rich and no poor, I've touched on briefly. That's principle number one, or value number one. And the second value, closely related to it, is the value of mutual aid. That's the idea that people should help each other. Very simple. It's the opposite, however, of the idea that prevails in capitalism, which is that we're all put on this planet to compete against each other, to compete to see who will be the winners and who will be the losers. And so among the people who share this value of competition, their only concern is that the world should be a level playing field, that the competition should be fair in the sense that everyone's individual merit is the only thing that determines if you're a winner or a loser, regardless of race or gender or nationality, religion, and so forth. But the egalitarian idea is that we're not on this planet to compete against each other. We're on this planet to help each other, to make it a better world for all. Okay. Most people, although they've never heard the word egalitarian before, are egalitarians in most communities in the planet, and including in the United States. Most people would say they agree with these two values of egalitarianism. That might not be true in some very wealthy communities, or maybe even some other non-wealthy communities here and there, but in most communities that's the case. So now we've defined who are the egalitarians, and not everybody is an egalitarian. Some people are anti-egalitarian, people who think that there ought to be some very rich people and some very poor people because, hey, that's fair, winners and losers. Some people think there has to be very rich people because otherwise there wouldn't be any civilization, there'd be none of the good things in life and so forth. Well, people have various reasons for disagreeing with the idea of no rich and no poor. Bill Gates doesn't agree with it. Warren Buffett doesn't agree with it. The Rockefeller family doesn't agree with it. The Walton family that owns Walmart, they don't agree with it. And but most people do. Okay, so let me say something about government in an egalitarian society. First, let me define what I mean by local community. A local community is a community that is about 30 or 40,000 people, although this is not written in stone. But the idea is that it's a community small enough so that when the local assembly of egalitarians is meeting, which is a body that is open to all the egalitarians in the local community to come and participate as equals in making decisions and writing laws for the local community. The local community is small enough so that all the egalitarians who wish to participate in that local assembly could do so physically. They could all fit in the same large room. And those of you who may have gone to conferences in big hotels know that most big hotels that have conferences at them have large conference halls that hold several thousand, many 4, 5, 6,000 people, sometimes more, and allow those people to have a plenary session, which means a session of the whole, and so it's not unreasonable for occasional local assemblies of egalitarians to be as large as several thousands of people, with, of course, smaller committees meeting maybe more frequently that are smaller and so forth. But so when I say local community, I'm thinking, since I live in Boston, the city of Boston has about 10 or 12 neighborhoods with names like Jamaica Plain and Roxbury and the South End and Hyde Park and so forth. And these neighborhoods, in which people have a sense of being in a particular neighborhood, are about 30 or 40,000 in population, and they would be something like what I mean by a local community. Okay, so the government in an egalitarian society works this way. In every local community, there is a local assembly of egalitarians, as I said, open to all the egalitarians in the local community. And at this local assembly, the people as equals make the laws and decide what's reasonable and what's not reasonable, and make policies that all the people in the local community have to obey. The local assembly is the government. It is the sovereign power. There is no higher level body of government above it that has lawmaking powers. That's the first element of an egalitarian society. What this means, if you think about it, is that egalitarians in a local community are never required to obey a law that they did not have an opportunity to help write as equals with all the others who wrote it. Egalitarians in a local community are not required to obey a law that was written by a so-called representative who claims the right to essentially be a dictator, to say, the representatives in our present system, they say, well, this is a law, we're writing it, and everyone has to obey it. I don't care if they agree with it or not. So, in that sense, there are no politicians. People are not electing representatives to be their dictator, the way it is today. Now, this raises the question, of course, well, how is large-scale coordination, large-scale social order achieved if every little local community is its own sovereign power? And the answer is by voluntary federation. Local assemblies send delegates to meet with delegates from other local assemblies, and the purpose of these what I call non-local assemblies, assemblies that are composed of delegates from local assemblies. The purpose of the non-local assemblies is not to write laws because they don't have lawmaking power. Their purpose is to craft proposals to be implemented by the local assemblies if they wish to, and not implemented if they don't wish to. And what that means in practice is negotiations and communications back and forth between the non-local assembly that's trying to craft a proposal for a larger region and the local assemblies and their delegates to go back and forth and come up hopefully with proposals that are agreed to by sufficient numbers of local assemblies to actually implement the proposal. And the types of non-local assemblies could vary in many ways. You know, some of them could consist of delegates who are concerned with creating or maintaining a functioning large university or very large economic enterprise, what we think of today as a multinational corporation even, or to organize the Olympics or some big cultural event that would require the participation of many, many local communities to make it happen. The Voluntary Federation is what I call this process. The local assemblies send delegates to meet with other delegates, and of course they can recall the delegate that they send at any time. But keep in mind that these delegates do not have lawmaking power, so it's not like your local assembly is deciding who's going to be their dictator. They're just sending someone who they hope can play a good and effective role in helping to craft a proposal that the local assembly will decide on its own that it wants to implement. And of course the non-local assemblies that might, at the lower level, might consist of delegates from a relatively small geographical region, maybe I think of it as a county, a state, something like that. And these non-local assemblies, in turn, can send delegates to meet with delegates from other such non-local assemblies, and when those delegates meet, they, in a sense, form an assembly that has input from a larger region, and that assembly in turn could send delegates to meet with similar ones from even more distant places, and you can ultimately have a non-local assembly that has input from the entire planet. Now, the degree of coordination and order that can be achieved by voluntary federation is just as much as the degree that can be achieved by the opposite principle, what I call the authoritarian principle, which is the principle we're all used to, which is the idea that somehow you end up with a small body of people who I'll call generically the central government, and the central government makes laws that everybody has to obey no matter what. Like the federal government, which consists of a few hundred individuals. They make laws, and everybody, all 300 plus million Americans, have to obey those laws no matter what. That's the authoritarian principle. The principle I'm advocating, the voluntary federation principle, is the principle that the International Postal Service is based on. There's something like 194, I think it is, nations that use voluntary federation to arrive at the coordination that we sort of take for granted today. When you mail a letter or a package to another country, it gets there.